Jerry's hand trembles as he unfolds Brianna's final letter, alone in his modest apartment the evening after her funeral. The paper crinkles beneath his weathered fingers, afternoon sunlight catching on the moisture gathering in his eyes. Memories flood back. Sunday dinners where she alone defended him, her quiet nods when Linda spoke over his business advice, her subtle wink across crowded rooms. "I've made arrangements," she'd said during her last visit. "Things that can't be undone." Now her elegant handwriting blurs as tears fall, mixing with the scent of coffee grown cold on the side table. Has someone ever seen your true worth when others couldn't? Share your story below, like if this touches your heart, and follow to see how Jerry reclaims not just his dignity, but his future. His fingers trace the signature, "With love and faith in you," as the phone rings, shattering the moment. The attorney, with news that will change everything. Jerry parked his sedan among the gleaming luxury vehicles outside Westlake Funeral Home. Through the windshield, morning sunlight caught the tremor in his weathered hands as he straightened his only good tie. The reflection staring back from the rearview mirror showed a face lined with 68 years of living, the corners of his eyes tightening against emotions he wouldn't allow himself to display. Not today. Not in front of them. The heavy oak doors of the funeral home swung open with familiar weight. Conversations halted mid-sentence as he entered, heads turning, then deliberately looking away. Jerry felt the silence ripple through the crowded foyer like a stone dropped in still water. His shoulders squared instinctively, chin lifting slightly as he moved toward the chapel. The back row seemed fitting, distance from the family he once belonged to. He settled onto the polished mahogany pew, its cold surface seeping through his suit pants. 3 seats remained empty beside him, despite mourners standing along the walls. The scent of lilies mingled with expensive perfume, creating a sweetness that couldn't mask the underlying bitterness of the moment. "Can you believe he actually showed up?" The whisper carried from 2 rows ahead, where Linda's bridge club sat in coordinated navy dresses. A flash of memory, Sunday dinners where Brianna silenced similar whispers with a sharp glance, defending him when no one else would. "Jerry's business sense saved this company twice," she'd once announced, cutting through the murmurs. His throat tightened at the memory. Mark's arrival created a stir, Jerry's son moving confidently up the aisle, Linda on his arm. Their eyes met briefly before Mark leaned toward his mother, whispering something that made her laugh aloud. The laughter spread, faces turning toward Jerry. His knuckles whitened against his knees, one finger at a time deliberately relaxing as he willed his expression to remain neutral. A single drop of moisture threatened at the corner of his eye, quickly blinked away. "She always did have a soft spot for strays," Linda stage whispered to a friend, loud enough to carry. Jerry's jaw tightened momentarily, but his gaze remained fixed forward. The coffee from the reception trembled slightly in the cup he held, the only betrayal of the storm beneath his composed exterior. A former colleague, someone who'd once called him for advice weekly, looked directly through his outstretched hand as if he were invisible. The particular sting of becoming unseen in your later years closed Jerry's throat, the practiced mask of dignity slipping just for a moment before he recovered. His thumb unconsciously brushed his bare ring finger, the phantom weight of belonging still present after all these years. The funeral director approached, his polished shoes coming into view before Jerry looked up. Conversations nearby halted abruptly as the man bent to whisper in Jerry's ear. "Mrs. Weston's attorney specifically requested your presence at the reading of the will, sir." The director's voice was professionally discreet, yet somehow carried to those watching. "He mentioned it was of particular importance that you arrive promptly." Jerry nodded once, aware of the curious eyes now fixed on him, the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. As the director moved away, Jerry caught Linda's sharp glance, the sudden stillness in Mark's previously relaxed posture. Something in Brianna's final arrangements had surprised them. And judging by their expressions, Whatever surprise awaited would not be to their liking. Jerry retreated to a quiet alcove off the main chapel, needing a moment alone before the confrontation to come. His pulse still raced from the funeral director's message. The stained glass window above cast colored light through dust motes dancing in the air, creating a kaleidoscope effect that suddenly transported him back 6 months to Brianna's unexpected visit. The doorbell had rung on a Sunday morning, catching him in the middle of his crossword puzzle. Opening the door to find Brianna Weston standing there, elegant coat buttoned against the February chill, silver hair perfectly coiffed, had been shock enough, but the determined set of her mouth had told him this was no casual visit. "May I come in, Jerry?" Her voice had carried the same authority it had when she ran board meetings, no hint that they hadn't spoken directly in years. His apartment wasn't much, a retiree's modest haven after the divorce settlement had taken most of what he'd built. Yet as Brianna entered, her appraising glance had held no pity, only thoughtful assessment. The creaking hardwood floors announced each step as she moved through his living room, pausing at the bookshelf where business texts and philosophy volumes stood in careful order. "Still a reader, I see." Her elegant finger had traced the spine of a well-worn strategy book. "You always did understand the long game, Jerry." That simple acknowledgement of his business acumen, so long dismissed by Linda and Mark, had nearly undone him. The coffee he'd offered had steamed between them as they sat, the grandfather clock ticking away seconds of unexpected connection. "The company's struggling," she'd said finally, voice dropping when discussing what should have been Mark's triumph. "The reports I'm given show growth, but something doesn't add up." Jerry had nodded, keeping his face neutral despite the surge of vindication. For years, Mark had rejected his warnings about expanding too quickly, leveraging too heavily. The bitter taste of being right brought no satisfaction.
Then Brianna had noticed it, the photograph he kept half hidden on the shelf. Sophie at 6 months old, cradled in his arms, his face alight with grandfather's joy. The last picture taken before the divorce, before access to his granddaughter became inappropriate, according to Linda's lawyers. Brianna had paused before it, voice softening as she asked, "Do you ever see her?" His eyes had moistened instantly, throat working silently as he shook his head, turning to adjust the thermostat, though the temperature was perfectly comfortable. That small kindness, acknowledging the loss, the years stolen, had cracked something in his carefully maintained composure. "She asks about you sometimes," Brianna had offered quietly. Mark refuses to answer, of course. A single tear had escaped down his cheek then, the particular ache of grandparent alienation too sharp to disguise. The irreplaceable nature of those lost years, first steps, lost teeth, school plays, stretched between them like a chasm. "Some treasures can't be measured in dollars, Jerry," Brianna had said, glancing around his modest home with genuine respect, rather than the pity others might show. Her hand had briefly touched his forearm, a gesture of connection he'd long been denied. "You've built a good life here, different than expected, but true to yourself." When she'd risen to leave, her parting words had seemed oddly cryptic. "Trust that I see clearly now, Jerry. Clearer than I have in years." Her hand had squeezed his with surprising strength before she'd whispered, "Sometimes justice takes patience." Then, glancing at her watch, she'd added, "And I've been very patient indeed." The memory faded as polished shoes appeared in Jerry's downcast view. Looking up, he found Brianna's attorney standing before him, files tucked precisely under one arm. "Mr. Donovan," Lawrence Jennings said quietly, "it's time." The private reading room felt unnaturally quiet after the murmured conversations of the funeral. Jerry took a seat near the door, conscious of the deliberate space others maintained around him. The heavy mahogany conference table gleamed under recessed lighting, reflecting the tense faces of those gathered.
A grandfather clock in the corner marked each second with solemn precision. Mark and Linda positioned themselves prominently at the table's head, where Brianna would have sat during company meetings. Their matching expressions of somber entitlement made something twist in Jerry's chest. 30 years of marriage to Linda, and he still couldn't fathom the calculation behind her eyes. Lawrence Jennings arranged his documents with methodical care, occasionally glancing at Jerry with an unreadable expression. The attorney's bow tie was perfectly centered, his gray suit immaculate, a man who understood the power of precision. "Did we really need to include everyone?" Mark whispered to Linda, loud enough for Jerry to hear. Both smirked in his direction, secure in their position. The gold bracelet on Linda's wrist caught the light as she patted her son's hand reassuringly. Jerry studied his folded hands, weathered from years of work despite his executive position. He'd always believed in understanding every aspect of the business, from factory floor to boardroom. Mark had mocked this approach as outdated, unnecessary. "Modern executives delegate," he'd said dismissively, never understanding that knowledge was its own form of power. Jennings cleared his throat, silencing the room instantly. "We are gathered to read the last will and testament of Brianna Elizabeth Weston," he began, voice steady and professional. Mrs. Weston was explicit in her instructions regarding this meeting and the distribution of her assets. Standard legal preamble followed, but Jerry noticed something unusual in the attorney's manner, a certain anticipation beneath the professional veneer, as if he were savoring what was to come. The ticking clock seemed to grow louder in the expectant silence. "To my daughter, Linda Margaret Donovan, and my grandson, Mark William Donovan, I leave a combined sum of $500,000 to be divided equally between them." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning registered. Linda's bracelet hit the table with a sharp metallic ring as her arm went slack in shock. Mark's face contorted from expectant smugness to utter disbelief, color draining visibly. "There must be some mistake," Linda managed, voice stripped of its practiced charm. "There is no mistake, Mrs. Donovan," Jennings replied calmly. The document continues. "To my former son-in-law, Jeremiah Allen Donovan, I leave the controlling interest in Weston Manufacturing, my personal investments valued at approximately $33 million, and my residence with all contents." A glass shattered somewhere as someone's drink slipped from nerveless fingers. The sound perfectly matched the fracturing of assumptions in the room. Jerry sat perfectly still, certain he had misheard. The company. 33 million. Brianna's home. The inheritance he'd never sought or expected now rested squarely on his shoulders. "This can't be legal," Mark hissed, half rising from his chair. "She wasn't in her right mind. He manipulated her somehow." "I assure you, Mr. Donovan, it is meticulously legal," Jennings responded, unruffled. Mrs. Weston underwent comprehensive cognitive assessment prior to these arrangements, specifically to prevent such challenges. The documentation is extensive and conclusive. Jerry's hands trembled slightly as the reality began to sink in. Years of dismissal, mockery, exclusion, and all along, Brianna had been watching, assessing, planning. His eyes filled with tears of disbelief and validation as the room stared at him in shock. The overwhelming emotion of being proven right after years of disrespect caught in his throat, making speech momentarily impossible. "Additionally," Jennings continued into the stunned silence, "Mrs. Weston has left a personal letter for Mr. Donovan." He extended a cream-colored envelope with Brianna's distinctive handwriting across the front. Jerry accepted it with fingers that weren't quite steady, the weight of the paper somehow substantial beyond its physical presence. Around the table, expressions ranged from shock to calculation to fury, the power dynamic of a lifetime reversed in a single moment. Mrs. Weston also instructed me to provide Mr. Donovan with immediate access to all company records, especially those kept in her private safe. Jennings added, looking directly at Mark. She was most explicit about this point. The implication hung in the air. Brianna had anticipated resistance, had prepared for it. As Jerry tucked the unopened letter into his jacket pocket, he caught a flicker of something unexpected on Lawrence Jennings's normally impassive face. It might have been satisfaction. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Jerry followed Helen Mercer through the darkened corridors of Weston Manufacturing. Night had fallen hours ago, but he'd wanted to see the company's true state away from watchful eyes. The building felt different after hours, hollowed out, the daytime bustle replaced by an eerie quiet that amplified their footsteps on the linoleum. Most of the administrative staff has been let go, Helen explained, her voice echoing slightly. The vintage brooch on her lapel, one of Brianna's, Jerry recognized, caught the uneven light as she moved. Mark said it was streamlining, but... She trailed off, leading him past rows of empty desks. Family photos still adorned some workstations, hastily abandoned when positions were eliminated. Jerry paused at one, recognizing Robert Martinez's children. The man had been with accounting for 20 years. "How many?" Jerry asked, throat tight. 42 in the past 18 months, no severance beyond the legal minimum. Helen's voice carried the weariness of someone who'd witnessed the dismantling of something she valued. Mrs. Weston was told it was normal turnover. They reached the manufacturing floor, and Helen flipped the switches. Instead of the hum of machinery Jerry remembered, the cavernous space remained silent. Dust-covered equipment that should have been running second shift. He ran his hand along a shelf that should have held inventory, his finger leaving a clean line in the gray film. "We're operating at 30% capacity," Helen said quietly. "Mark keeps telling the board it's strategic inventory management." Jerry felt a heaviness settling in his chest. The company Brianna had built from nothing, that he had helped grow for 3 decades, the legacy that employed hundreds of families, gutted from within by his own son. "The employees who remain?" he asked. "Scared, overworked, no bonuses for 3 years while the executive compensation package has tripled." Helen's voice broke slightly. "Some have been here since the beginning, Mr. Donovan. They stayed loyal to Mrs. Weston, even when things didn't make sense." Jerry nodded, understanding the particular betrayal of exploiting loyalty. He'd seen it before in business, the slow extraction of value until nothing remained but an empty shell. But never had he imagined his own flesh and blood capable of such calculated destruction. "I need to see the financials," he said. Helen led him to Brianna's office, untouched since her health had begun failing 6 months earlier. Her reading glasses still rested on the desk blotter where she'd last placed them. The subtle scent of her perfume lingered in the leather chair where she'd made decisions for decades. Jerry hesitated before sitting down, the weight of responsibility suddenly overwhelming. "The official records are on the computer," Helen said, switching on the monitor. "But Mrs. Weston kept her own accounts. She sensed something was wrong, but couldn't prove it." The blue glow of the screen illuminated Jerry's face as Helen pulled up the company's financial statements. The numbers didn't add up, not to someone who'd spent a lifetime reading between the lines of balance sheets, profitable divisions, mysteriously underperforming, questionable consulting fees to entities he didn't recognize, inventory write-downs that made no operational sense. "These reports to Brianna?" he asked, pointing to a folder icon. "Modified. I discovered it by accident when I compared a printed copy to the digital version." Helen's voice had dropped to a whisper, though they were alone in the building. She was being shown selective data. Hour after hour, the true picture emerged through methodical examination. The company wasn't just struggling, it was being systematically stripped. Loans against assets, executive bonuses, despite declining performance, pension fund irregularities that made Jerry's blood run cold. "The employees' retirement accounts?" he asked, dreading the answer. "Legal minimum contributions only, despite promises of matching funds. The difference was redirected to executive performance bonuses." Helen's eyes glistened in the dim light. "Some of these people have worked here 30 years, Mr. Donovan. They're counting on those pensions." The rage built slowly as the evidence mounted. Not a hot, reactive anger, but something deeper and colder. His hands began to shake, not with age, but with fury at the calculated betrayal. Not just of Brianna's trust, not just of his own legacy, but of every person who had given years of loyal service. Alone in Brianna's office after Helen had gone home, Jerry finally allowed the anger full expression. His fist struck the desk with unexpected force, scattering papers across the polished surface. The sound echoed in the empty room, followed by the ragged sound of his breathing as he struggled to regain control. This wasn't just family drama anymore. Real lives hung in the balance: mortgages, college tuitions, retirements. The responsibility Brianna had placed on his shoulders suddenly felt both heavier and more clarifying. This wasn't about vindication, it was about justice. As midnight approached, Jerry methodically reorganized the scattered papers, his movements becoming deliberate and controlled once more. Behind Brianna's desk, he noticed a panel in the wooden wainscoting that didn't quite match the surrounding wood. Pressing gently, he felt it give way, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a folder labeled in Brianna's elegant handwriting, "Contingency, if Mark fails," and beneath it, his own name, written with a certainty that suggested she had never doubted this moment would come. The corner table at Riverside Cafe offered the privacy Jerry needed. Rain streaked the windows, creating a cocoon-like atmosphere that muffled the soft jazz playing in the background. He'd arrived early, securing a spot far from curious eyes, unsure if the meeting would actually happen. The text message had been simple: "Need to talk about Grandma, noon tomorrow, Riverside Cafe." The unfamiliar number might have been ignored, except for the signature: Sophie, his granddaughter, 19 years old now. The last time he'd held her, she'd been learning to walk, chubby hands gripping his fingers for balance. The bell above the door jingled, and Jerry looked up to see a young woman hesitating at the entrance, scanning the cafe. His heart seized momentarily. Even without their years apart, he would have known her instantly. Sophie had his eyes, the same thoughtful gaze that assessed before concluding. Her posture, straight-backed but with a slight tilt of the head, mirrored his own so precisely it was startling. She spotted him and approached cautiously, sliding into the booth with a nervousness that matched his own. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of lost years creating a chasm wider than the table between them. "Thank you for coming," she finally said, voice steadier than her fidgeting hand suggested. "I wasn't sure you would." "I would have come anywhere," Jerry replied simply, the words carrying the weight of 19 years of missed birthdays, school plays, and graduations. The waitress brought coffee, and Jerry watched Sophie add cream with the same precise amount he preferred. Some things, it seemed, transcended separation. "Dad's furious about the will," she said without preamble. "He's been on the phone with lawyers nonstop." Jerry nodded, unsurprised. "I expected as much." "He says you manipulated Grandma." Sophie's eyes studied him carefully, searching for truth. "But that doesn't match what I found in her things." She reached into her bag and withdrew a small bundle of papers. Jerry recognized Brianna's distinctive stationery. "After Grandma got sick, I started spending more time at her house," Sophie explained. "She asked me to read to her. Then one day, she asked me to find a specific book in her library." Sophie's hesitant smile flickered. There was a hidden compartment behind it with these inside. Jerry's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the papers. Letters, mostly. Some he recognized as ones he'd sent years ago that had supposedly never reached Brianna. Others were in her handwriting, apparently never mailed. Notes about Sophie's activities, photographs of school events Jerry had never known about. "She kept track of everything," Sophie said quietly. "She told me that someday I'd need to know the truth about our family, that appearances weren't always reality." A photograph slipped from the stack. Sophie at her high school graduation, her smile bright beneath the cap. The ache of having missed the moment caught in Jerry's throat, a grief so specific to grandparent alienation that it had no adequate name. "Dad says you abandoned us," Sophie continued, watching him carefully. "But Grandma said you fought for visitation for years, until the legal fees nearly bankrupted you." Jerry swallowed hard, the memory of those desperate years still raw. "Your father was very thorough in keeping us apart." "Why?" The simple question carried 19 years of confusion. "Because I questioned his business decisions," Jerry said after a moment. "And your father doesn't tolerate dissent, especially when it's justified." Sophie nodded slowly, as if pieces were falling into place. "He's been having secret meetings," she said, voice dropping, "with representatives from Consolidated Industries. I overheard them discussing a sale of Weston Manufacturing, contingent on him gaining control through a challenge to Grandma's will." Jerry's coffee cup paused mid-air. Consolidated had been trying to acquire Weston for years, mainly to eliminate competition and strip its assets. Hundreds of jobs would vanish within months of such a sale. "There's more," Sophie said, leaning forward. "Dad's been moving money from the company into offshore accounts. I found statements in his office when I was looking for Grandma's medical records." The rain intensified outside, matching the growing storm in Jerry's mind. Mark wasn't just mismanaging the company. He was actively preparing to abandon it, extracting maximum personal gain before walking away from the wreckage. Jerry's phone buzzed with an incoming message from his attorney. Mark had officially filed a legal challenge to the will, claiming undue influence and diminished capacity on Brianna's part. The court date was set for 3 weeks from today. "I should go," Sophie said, gathering her things. "Dad can't know we met." As she stood, her resemblance to the little girl Jerry had lost struck him with physical force. The years between them, irretrievable, filled with moments he would never witness, suddenly overwhelmed him. What if the courts sided with Mark? What if this tentative reconnection was severed again? "Sophie," he said, voice rougher than intended, "thank you for finding me." She hesitated, then impulsively reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Grandma said you were the one person who never lied to her. I think maybe I need that too." After she left, Jerry sat alone in the cafe, the evidence of Mark's betrayal spread before him like a map of destruction. The company's financial crisis, the legal challenge, the limited time to mount a defense, the weight of it all pressed down until he could barely breathe. For a moment, the temptation to walk away nearly overwhelmed him. Why fight? Why not let Mark have his hollow victory? Let the court battles drain what remained of Jerry's resources and energy? At 68, did he really want to start over, rebuilding what his son had systematically destroyed? A family at a nearby table caught his attention, grandparents with a young girl, perhaps 7 or 8. The grandfather was helping her color, his weathered hand guiding hers with gentle patience. The simple joy on both their faces made something crack inside Jerry's carefully maintained composure. That should have been him and Sophie. That connection, that legacy of love and guidance, had been stolen from both of them. Outside the cafe window, Jerry noticed an older man huddled in a doorway across the street, watching. The man looked away quickly when their eyes met, pulling his collar higher against the rain. Has betrayal ever cut so deep you wondered if healing was possible? Share your pain below, like if this story touches your heart, and follow to discover if Jerry can rebuild what's been broken before it's too late. Jerry gathered the papers with renewed purpose. If Mark wanted a fight, he would get one, not for vengeance, but for justice, for Brianna's legacy, for the employees whose futures hung in the balance. And most of all, for the chance to know his granddaughter after all these years apart. The security system in Brianna's home accepted Jerry's fingerprint with a soft electronic chime, an unexpected preparation that suggested she'd been planning this moment for longer than he'd realized. Lawrence Jennings stood beside him in the foyer, his professional demeanor softened slightly by the late hour. Mrs. Weston updated the security protocols 6 months ago, the attorney explained. She was quite insistent that you have unrestricted access when the time came. Jerry nodded, momentarily overwhelmed by the familiar scent of Brianna's home. Lemon polish on the antique furniture, the subtle floral notes of her preferred room spray, the earthier tones of the leather-bound books lining her study. The grandfather clock in the hallway, the twin of the one in the conference room, marked each second with familiar precision. "Her private office is this way," Jennings said, leading him down the hallway. The room was exactly as Jerry remembered from his last visit years ago, before the divorce had severed so many connections. Heavy oak desk positioned to catch morning light through east-facing windows. Photographs of the company's evolution along one wall. The modest Weston Manufacturing logo, unchanged since 1962, framed above the fireplace. "The safe is behind the painting." Jennings indicated a landscape of the Rocky Mountains that Jerry knew had been painted by Brianna's father. "Mrs. Weston left explicit instructions that only you should access its contents." With that, the attorney excused himself, promising to return in the morning to address any legal questions. The subtle click of the front door left Jerry alone in the silence of Brianna's most private space. The safe opened smoothly with the combination Jennings had provided. Brianna's birthday, followed by the year Weston Manufacturing had made its first profit. Inside, Jerry found not the jumble of documents he'd expected, but a meticulously organized filing system, color-coded and cross-referenced with her characteristic precision. The first folder contained what appeared to be a parallel accounting system, one set of records for the company board, another documenting Brianna's private observations and concerns. Her elegant handwriting filled the margins with questions that grew increasingly pointed over time. Inventory discrepancy third quarter? Executive bonus structure excessive? Pension fund allocations reduced? Why? Deeper in the safe, Jerry discovered something even more unexpected. 2 thick folders labeled simply Mark and Jerry, spanning decades. Opening his own, he found performance evaluations, notes from board meetings, clippings of industry successes, and detailed observations about his business decisions. Brianna had been systematically documenting his career even after he'd left the company, noting from afar the consulting successes he'd achieved, despite Mark's efforts to blackball him in the industry. The Mark folder told a different story, a methodical record of tests Brianna had apparently set for her grandson, opportunities to demonstrate character and business acumen. Page after page documented failures, increasingly severe as his authority had grown. Notes in Brianna's hand grew more concerned. Third integrity test failed. Prioritized appearance over substance again. Shows pattern of deflecting responsibility. Uses charm to cover fundamental misunderstanding of manufacturing principles. A separate red folder contained what appeared to be evidence of Linda's attempt to manipulate the will through forged medical assessments, alongside Brianna's systematic dismantling of the deception. "Linda believes I don't recognize her handwriting after 50 years, one note read with uncharacteristic sarcasm. Assessment ordered independently confirms full capacity. Most shocking were the intercepted communications, copies of letters Jerry had sent to Brianna over the years, marked "Return to Sender," but clearly opened. Phone messages transcribed, but never delivered. Even an invitation to dinner on what had been his 65th birthday, a night he'd spent alone believing everyone had forgotten. A tear fell onto a letter as Jerry read Brianna's private assessment. "Jerry remains the son of my heart, if not my blood. What Linda and Mark cannot understand is that family is built on character, not merely DNA. The company needs his steady hand, not Mark's impulsive grasping." The moon had risen high outside the window by the time Jerry discovered the final revelation, a slim folder labeled Sophie, containing something he'd never expected. Years of correspondence between Brianna and her granddaughter, beginning when Sophie was just 13. Secret letters exchanged during visits, questions about family history, Brianna's careful answers revealing truth without destructive bitterness. One passage caught in his throat. "Your grandfather asks about you every time we speak, Sophie. He keeps your school picture in his wallet, though it's years out of date now." Some bonds can't be broken, even when they're stretched across time and silence. Jerry sat back in Brianna's chair, eyes closed momentarily as he whispered, "I won't let you down," to the empty room, his hand resting on her desk as if making a formal promise. The weight of responsibility felt different now, not a burden, but a trust passed deliberately from one set of capable hands to another. The evidence before him provided both emotional closure and strategic advantage. Mark's systematic deception, Linda's manipulation attempts, the company's true state, all meticulously documented by a woman whose attention to detail had built an empire from nothing. With clarity born of decades in business, Jerry began to formulate a comprehensive strategy. The legal challenge would be defeated using Brianna's extensive documentation of her mental capacity. The company's decline could be reversed by addressing the specific weaknesses Mark had created. The employees' futures could be secured by restoring proper pension management, and perhaps most importantly, the bridge to Sophie could be strengthened, creating at least one connection across the chasm Mark and Linda had spent years digging. Outside, the moon disappeared behind clouds, casting the room into deeper shadow. In that darkness, Jerry allowed himself a moment of grief for what could have been. The years of mentorship lost, family holidays never shared, wisdom never passed directly to the next generation. Then, with the discipline of a man who had rebuilt himself once before, he began organizing the evidence into categories: legal defense, company restoration, family truth. The path forward would not be simple or painless, but it was clear. On Brianna's desk calendar, he found a date, circled in red, the day after her funeral, with a single note in her distinctive script. "Jerry begins. Trust his judgment." Even from beyond, she had anticipated this moment. The trust implied in those 4 words settled around his shoulders like a mantle of responsibility and opportunity combined. By dawn, the strategy was complete. Not a plan for revenge, though that might have been justified, but something Brianna would have recognized and approved. A blueprint for restoration, for justice, for legacy preserved through difficult choices and clear-eyed assessment. As the first light broke through the windows, Jerry gathered the essential documents into his briefcase. On the desk, he left the empty folders arranged in a pattern Brianna would have appreciated: order emerging from chaos, clarity from confusion, purpose from pain. It was time to rebuild what had been broken. Jerry's apartment looked different now, transformed from quiet retreat to command center. Documents covered the dining table in precise stacks: financial records, Brianna's notes, legal precedents, employee data. The coffee pot had been refilled so many times that the bitter scent permeated everything, mixing with the pre-dawn air seeping through partially opened windows. He hadn't slept. The weight of decisions to be made had kept his mind racing through the night, analyzing options, discarding approaches that satisfied emotion but failed strategy. The reflection in his window showed a man transformed, back straightened by purpose, eyes sharp with clarity despite the hour. Mrs. Weston's documentation of her mental capacity is extensive. Lawrence Jennings had assured him during their late-night call. The independent evaluations, the video testimony, the consistent pattern in her business decisions all create a formidable barrier to Mr. Mark Donovan's challenge. Jerry had nodded, phone pressed to his ear, mentally cataloging next steps. Legal defense was only one dimension of the challenge before him. The company itself needed immediate intervention to stop the bleeding. Employees deserved to know their futures weren't being sacrificed to one man's greed. Then there was Mark himself. The evidence was damning enough to justify criminal charges, Pension fund mismanagement alone could mean prison time. The question wasn't whether Jerry could destroy his son's future, but whether he should. The simplest path was clear: maximum consequences for maximum betrayal. The board would support removing Mark entirely. The legal system would process the financial misdeeds. The company could start fresh, without the cancer that had been growing within it. But something in Brianna's meticulous records had given Jerry pause. She had documented Mark's failings with clinical precision, yet had never completely given up on him. Notes in the margins questioned whether different guidance might have created different outcomes. Nature or nurture, she'd written beside a particularly troubling incident. Linda's influence or inherent character flaw. Jerry's hand hovered now between two separate folders on his table, one labeled termination and one reformation. The first contained the evidence needed to remove Mark completely, potentially triggering criminal investigation. The second outlined a conditional path: accountability with supervision, restitution without destruction, consequence without annihilation. A single tear of resolution tracked down his face as his hand moved deliberately toward the second folder, not from weakness, but from the wisdom of understanding that complete destruction left no path for growth, for anyone involved. His phone vibrated with an incoming call from Sophie. "Grandpa?" The word, so long denied him, caught in his chest. "Dad's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. He's telling everyone he has evidence you manipulated Grandma." Jerry's eyes closed briefly, centering himself. "Thank you for telling me. There's more," she continued, voice dropping, though she was presumably alone. "He's planning to present forged documents about your relationship with Grandma. I saw them in his office, emails you supposedly sent threatening her." The crude tactic wasn't surprising, but the desperation it revealed was useful information. Mark was panicking, abandoning subtlety for brute force deception. "What are you going to do?" Sophie asked, the question carrying weight beyond the immediate crisis. Jerry looked at his reflection again, at the man Brianna had trusted to carry her legacy forward. "He expects me to destroy him completely," he said, voice calm with revelation, "and that expectation reveals everything about his own character." After the call ended, Jerry methodically organized the evidence files, each movement deliberate and controlled, as he labeled and cross-referenced materials for tomorrow's confrontation. The approach crystallized with each passing hour, not the scorched earth victory Mark would have pursued, but something more difficult and ultimately more powerful. When trust has been shattered beyond recognition, is wisdom found in vengeance or mercy? Share what you'd do in Jerry's position, like if you believe true strength lies in how we handle betrayal, and follow to witness the moment when truth finally takes center stage. Helen arrived as sunlight broke fully across the horizon, bringing updated employee records and quiet determination. Carlos followed an hour later, his knowledge of operations crucial to understanding how quickly production could be restored. By mid-morning, a small team of loyal employees had gathered, each bringing pieces to complete the puzzle of the company's recovery. "You could end him with this," Helen said quietly, reviewing the evidence of pension fund manipulation. "The board would support criminal charges." Jerry nodded, acknowledging the truth of her assessment. "I could," he agreed, "but Brianna spent 30 years trying to teach him better. I'm not sure she'd want his destruction to be her final lesson." He slid the Reformation folder across the table. "This is harder," he explained. "Consequences with opportunity for change. Accountability with supervised redemption. Justice that builds rather than simply punishes." Helen studied the proposal, her expression shifting from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "It's not what he deserves," she finally said. "No," Jerry agreed. "It's what the company deserves, what the employees deserve. A path forward that isn't defined solely by one man's failings." By afternoon, the strategy was set. Not a plan for revenge, though that might have satisfied a smaller man, but something Brianna would have recognized and approved, a blueprint for restoration, accountability, and clear-eyed assessment of both business and character. As Jerry adjusted his tie in preparation for tomorrow's confrontation, he caught himself standing straighter, shoulders squared against whatever came next. The reflection in the mirror showed something he hadn't fully recognized until this moment. Not just Brianna's chosen successor, but a man worthy of the trust she'd placed in him. "I see clearly now, too, Brianna," he whispered to the empty room, picking up the folder that would shape tomorrow's outcome. "And I won't let you down." The Weston Manufacturing boardroom hummed with tense anticipation. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like visible manifestations of the charged atmosphere. Family company photos lined the walls chronologically, silent witnesses to the drama about to unfold. Jerry arrived precisely 10 minutes early, deliberately choosing a seat opposite the one Mark had always claimed, Brianna's former position at the head of the table. Helen and Lawrence Jennings flanked him, presenting a united front of calm professionalism against the storm they knew was coming. Board members filed in, their curious glances barely concealing their discomfort. Most had served during Jerry's time as CFO years ago, before Mark's machinations had pushed him out. Their handshakes were tentative, as if unsure which way allegiance should flow until the power struggle clarified. Mark's entrance was calculated for maximum effect, striding in 5 minutes late with Linda beside him, a team of attorneys trailing behind. His confident smirk suggested a man who believed victory was already secured. He barely glanced at Jerry as he took his seat, arranging papers with theatrical precision. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Mark began without preamble. "We face an unfortunate situation regarding my grandmother's will that requires immediate resolution." Jerry watched his son with a detachment that surprised him. This stranger wearing familiar features, who had inherited his jawline, but none of his principles. There was Linda's practiced charm in the way he addressed the board, her talent for making self-interest sound like concern for others. "My legal team has uncovered disturbing evidence of undue influence," Mark continued, sliding folders toward each board member. "My grandmother's declining health made her vulnerable to manipulation, particularly from individuals who had been estranged from the family for years." His pointed glance at Jerry was met with impassive calm. Let him play out his hand completely, Jerry thought. Let the depths be fully revealed before the truth emerges. These documents show a pattern of correspondence and interference that deeply concerns us, Mark explained, his voice taking on the practiced gravity of rehearsed sincerity. Emails threatening legal action, manipulated financial reports, even thinly veiled suggestions of public embarrassment if my grandmother didn't comply with certain demands. Board members shifted uncomfortably, reviewing the forged emails with furrowed brows. One, an elderly man who had known Brianna for 40 years, looked particularly troubled as he glanced between the documents and Jerry. Given this evidence, Mark concluded, we're asking the board to pass an emergency resolution maintaining current management until the courts can properly review my grandmother's mental capacity at the time these decisions were made. It's unfortunate, but necessary to protect the company she loved. The silence that followed was heavy with expectation. All eyes turned to Jerry, anticipating denial, anger, or desperate defense. Instead, he simply nodded once and said quietly, "May I respond?" Mark's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. This calm wasn't the reaction he'd anticipated. "Before I address these specific allegations," Jerry began, voice steady, "I'd like to share something with the board that Mrs. Weston prepared for this exact moment." Lawrence Jennings placed a laptop on the table, connecting it to the room's projection system. The screen filled with Brianna's face, not the frail woman of her final months, but the sharp-eyed executive from a year earlier, sitting in this very boardroom. If you're viewing this recording, she began without preamble, then Jerry Donovan is being accused of manipulating me, likely by my grandson Mark and my daughter Linda. Mark's confident smirk faltered visibly. Linda's hand went to her bracelet, twisting it nervously.
Let me be absolutely clear, Brianna continued from beyond, her voice carrying the same authority it had in life. I am of sound mind, as the 3 independent medical evaluations attached to this recording will confirm. My decision to leave controlling interest in Weston Manufacturing to Jerry Donovan is the result of 30 years of observation, assessment, and painful recognition of character deficiencies I had hoped would improve with time. The recording continued for 10 minutes, Brianna methodically dismantling every potential challenge to her decision, citing specific incidents, dates, and witnesses to Mark's mismanagement and Jerry's steady judgment. The board members' expressions shifted from confusion to shock as the extent of her preparation became clear. When the recording ended, Jerry opened his own folder with deliberate calm. Now to address the specific allegations, he said, his methodical presentation a stark contrast to Mark's emotional appeals. The emails you've been given are forgeries. Examination of metadata proves they were created last week, backdated and printed. Mrs. Weston anticipated this tactic as well. One by one, Jerry dismantled the fabricated evidence, presenting Brianna's parallel records documenting her actual interactions and decisions. With each revelation, Mark's face grew paler, his earlier confidence dissolving into visible panic. What you haven't yet seen, Jerry continued, is the actual state of the company under current management. The financial presentation that followed left no room for interpretation, systematically stripped assets, executive bonuses despite declining performance, pension fund irregularities that made several board members audibly gasp. This is slander, Mark finally interrupted, voice losing its practiced control. These numbers are manipulated. The numbers come directly from the company's accounting system, Jerry replied calmly, accessed using Mrs. Weston's executive credentials, which she specifically transferred to me for this purpose. The board chairman, a contemporary of Brianna's who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. Are you suggesting criminal activity, Mr. Donovan? The moment had come. Jerry could see the fear in Mark's eyes, the recognition that his career, his freedom, possibly his future were balanced on his father's next words. What I'm suggesting, Jerry said carefully, is a failure of both management and character that requires immediate correction. He slid a document across the table toward Mark. This outlines a path forward that addresses the company's needs while providing an opportunity for accountability and growth. Mark stared at the paper before him, confusion replacing fear as he skimmed its contents. Supervised role, ethics training, repayment schedule. His voice rose with each question. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious, Jerry replied. Your role depends on your signature acknowledging your actions and committing to change, not my requirement, Brianna's. He pushed a second document forward. This alternative involves the board referring evidence of financial irregularities to the appropriate authorities. Mrs. Weston left the choice between these options to my discretion. Mark's hand shook visibly as he reached for the first document, eyes darting between faces around the table, measuring his complete loss of support. The boardroom door opened quietly, and all heads turned as Sophie stepped inside. Without hesitation, she walked to Jerry's side of the table and took the empty seat beside him, her choice as clear as it was unexpected. Sophie, Linda hissed. What are you doing? I've seen the evidence too, Dad, Sophie said quietly, her gaze steady on her father. All of it. Grandma showed me where to look before she died. The final piece of Mark's confident facade crumbled. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of his pen scratching against paper as he signed the agreement Jerry had offered, the path of accountability over destruction.
Jerry felt no triumph as he watched his son's signature complete the document, only a complex mixture of sadness for what had been lost and cautious hope for what might still be rebuilt. The public vindication of having his character recognized after years of misrepresentation brought tears to his eyes, but they were not tears of victory. As the meeting concluded, board members approached Jerry one by one, offering support, apologies for past doubts, commitments to the company's restoration. The power shift was complete, not through vindictiveness, but through truth methodically revealed. Sophie remained beside him throughout, her presence a bridge between past wounds and future possibilities. When the room finally emptied, leaving just the two of them, she turned to him with eyes that reflected his own. "Was that justice?" she asked simply. Jerry considered the question carefully, understanding its importance to them both. "Justice isn't always what we expect," he finally said. "Sometimes it's giving people exactly what they need, rather than what they deserve." Outside the boardroom windows, clouds shifted, altering the light across the company photos on the wall, generations of Weston history now entrusted to his care, not through blood, but through character proven over time. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as recognition of Brianna's final, most meaningful vote of confidence. 6 months had transformed Weston Manufacturing. The manufacturing floor hummed with machinery operating at full capacity, the rhythm of productivity replacing the hollow silence Jerry had first encountered. Employees moved with renewed purpose, the uncertainty that had clouded their futures replaced by the stability of transparent leadership and restored benefits. Jerry paused in the lobby, studying the newly installed portrait of Brianna, captured not in formal business attire as the board had suggested, but in the casual elegance she'd preferred for company celebrations, sleeves rolled up slightly as if ready to work alongside everyone else. The artist had perfectly captured her penetrating gaze, the slight curve of her mouth that suggested amusement at secrets only she understood. "She would have approved," Helen said, appearing beside him with a stack of reports. The vintage brooch that had belonged to Brianna now had a permanent place on her lapel, a small symbol of continuity amid necessary change. "The board approved the pension restoration plan unanimously," she continued. "Every employee will receive the full matching funds that were promised, plus interest on the amounts that were diverted." Jerry nodded, satisfaction warming him more than pride ever could. The legal maneuvers had been complex, the financial restructuring challenging, but the human element, restoring trust, rebuilding confidence, had been the true measure of success. The scholarship program established in Brianna's name for employees' children had already accepted its first recipients. The profit-sharing system she had always advocated had been implemented company-wide. The legacy she had entrusted to him was not just surviving, but evolving in ways she would have championed herself. Mark's supervised role had begun awkwardly, his initial resentment barely concealed behind compliance. Weekly accountability meetings were tense exercises in restraint on both sides. Yet gradually, small shifts had appeared, questions asked rather than decisions imposed, occasional acknowledgments of past errors, tentative suggestions that showed genuine thought rather than self-promotion. Whether these changes reflected genuine growth or merely pragmatic adaptation remained unclear. What mattered was that the company no longer suffered from his unilateral control, and employees no longer feared arbitrary dismissal for questioning decisions. Linda had made her choice differently. Refusing any connection to the new reality, she had retreated to Florida with her portion of the inheritance, maintaining that she had been victimized by circumstances beyond her control. Her absence created its own kind of peace, one less source of friction in an already complex situation. The elevator doors opened, revealing Sophie deep in conversation with Carlos about production efficiencies. Her internship in operations had begun as a summer experiment, but had quickly evolved into serious training. She had her grandmother's eye for detail, Jerry's analytical approach to problems, and her own unique perspective that bridged generations of business practice. Watching her engage with long-time employees, asking thoughtful questions and actually listening to the answers, Jerry felt a bittersweet mixture of pride and grief. Joy in the relationship they were building now, sorrow for the years that could never be recovered. "Ready for the staff meeting?" Sophie asked, joining him by Brianna's portrait. Jerry nodded, the weight of his responsibility balanced by the satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. Together they walked toward the conference room where department heads waited for the monthly review. Several empty chairs had been left at the large table, not by accident but by deliberate design. One for Mark, who sometimes attended but often found reasons to be elsewhere. One for Linda, though everyone understood it would likely remain vacant, and one symbolically left for Brianna, a reminder of the standards to which they all held themselves accountable. That evening, Jerry stood on the porch of what was now his home. Brianna's house maintained much as she had left it, though gradually accepting his presence through subtle changes. The porch swing creaked gently as he settled into it, the cooling evening air carrying the scent of late summer roses from the garden she had tended for decades. In his hand, he held the letter she had left him, worn now from multiple readings, its message no less powerful for its familiarity. "Character reveals itself through patterns, not incidents," she had written. "You have shown who you are through thousands of choices, large and small. That is why I trust you with what matters most to me." The stars emerged gradually overhead, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. From inside came the sound of Sophie in the kitchen, preparing for the weekly dinner that had become their tradition. Mark had yet to accept an invitation, but the place continued to be set for him, possibility without expectation. A single tear tracked down Jerry's face as he folded the letter carefully, returning it to his pocket. Not a tear of sadness, but of gratitude for the chance to rebuild what had been broken, to create meaning from pain, to transform betrayal into opportunity for growth. The porch light cast a warm glow across the swing as Jerry rose to join Sophie inside. The company was secure. The employees were protected. The future had space for healing, even if some wounds would always leave scars. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing, vindication or revenge. It was about honoring trust placed in capable hands, about using wisdom to build rather than destroy, about understanding that true legacy lives not in assets transferred, but in values transmitted across time. As Jerry stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him, he carried with him the certainty that Brianna had seen clearly after all, not just about who had failed, but about who could be trusted to begin again. Some endings, he had learned, were really just different kinds of beginnings. You've sat in that quiet room, haven't you? Maybe it was a den with creaking floorboards or a kitchen with the lingering scent of morning coffee. A place where you once felt secure, before the letter came, or the phone call, or the whispered conversation you weren't meant to hear. That moment when trust, built over decades of believing in someone, cracks like an old photograph frame dropped on hardwood. We all know that particular ache, don't we, folks? The kind that starts behind your ribs and spreads outward, leaving your hands trembling on the tabletop. Ain't it strange how betrayal always feels cold? Like Jerry discovering what his son had done, you've perhaps wondered how someone who knew your heart could so carelessly break it. How family, blood of your blood, could look you in the eye while undermining everything you built. Those tears you shed when no one was watching. They're badges of honor now. Each one marked a moment when you could have surrendered to bitterness, but chose dignity instead. Remember how it felt when they dismissed your experience, your wisdom, treating decades of hard-earned knowledge like outdated baggage rather than the treasure it truly is. That sting never quite leaves, but it changes over time, becomes less sharp, more instructive. The path from those first shocked tears to standing tall again isn't straight or simple. Some days the porch swing creaks with the weight of your doubts. Some nights, starlight catches on moisture still gathering in your eyes, but there's strength in those quiet moments, in choosing to set another place at the table even when you're not sure they'll come, in leaving the door unlocked for reconciliation that might never arrive. What Jerry learned, what we all learn eventually, is that the measure of our character isn't found in how others treat us, but in how we respond when wronged. The hands that once trembled with hurt gradually steady themselves with purpose. The heart that cracked doesn't heal perfectly. It mends with visible seams that make it stronger, more resilient, more capable of genuine compassion. Your legacy isn't just what you leave behind, darling. It's what you stand for while you're still here. It's having the courage to offer mercy without abandoning justice, to protect what matters without destroying what could still grow. Some wounds won't ever completely heal, but they can become part of a story worth telling. So tonight, as your own clock ticks in the quiet of your home, know that your tears weren't wasted. Your heartache wasn't meaningless. Your wisdom, hard-won through years of living, remains your most valuable asset. And your capacity to begin again, even after everything, may be the greatest legacy of all.